right. So we have a few minutes now for any feedback on the topic, discussions, questions. Anybody, just let me know if you have a question. I'll bring the mic over to you. Anybody want to get the ball started? Well, I can do it. So actually, it's for you, Pete. Just coming fresh off the security topic. So, you know, attaching mobile devices to enterprise networks, you know, big deal. And some companies, you know, have kind of sidestepped the issue. And so I'm wondering, what other ways have you seen, you know, if companies aren't prepared to put wearables directly on their corporate network, have you seen examples of where companies would maybe set up other networks or secondary networks that are somehow firewalled or blocked off from the main network? And is that a valid approach? Is that a sustainable model, or would you recommend against that?
So they're right now with our IoT gateway approach, so that's being used. At some point, you do want to do the integration with the network. And that's usually to access some of the other information, the back-end ERP type systems. You'll typically, if that's the way that they go, they'll do that at the pilot stage. And then when they go into production and they roll out a significant number of wearable devices, that's when they integrate it into the full network at that time.
Is that something you see frequently, that kind of phased approach?
It is, and so even at the pilot phase, they just don't want to access. There's a lot. They'll use dummy data. They'll do all sorts of things at a pilot phase just to kind of prove out the use case. And then when they say, okay, we know the value proposition, we know the ROI, now we'll do the full integration.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Question from the audience?
Rich, who owns your hardware?
I'm sorry?
Who owns your hardware that you pay for these different companies?
For our current enterprise customers?
Yeah. Do you own it? Or is
So the question was, who owns the hardware that Rich company develops?
In the cases that I mentioned up here, we're designing it for the enterprise customer, building it and selling it to them.
Okay.
So.
Was there a question over here somewhere? Just.
So Ryan, I have a question for you. Most of the presentations that I saw was focused on enterprise software or enterprise sector. Why is it the customer sector or consumer sector is not addressed at all? I mean, is it not a part of AR going forward, or is it for now taking a backseat?
Was that directed to me?
Anybody?
Oh. Well, you know, from our perspective, and certainly with our history in defense, you know, our very strong hypothesis a few years ago was similar to the conversation with Atheer, that the adoption of wearables in the enterprise space would be much more rapid, purely based on the fact that there's a tangible ROI. And I think the secondary factor, in all honesty, is there's sacrifices from a hardware standpoint. There's sacrifices that enterprise customers are willing to make from a form factor standpoint that I don't think consumers are quite ready to make yet. But, you know, 3 to 4 to 5 years down the road, you know, perhaps those form factor trade-offs will be more palatable to consumers as the content becomes more valuable to them. But our perspective is probably similar to a lot of folks up here, that it's a lot easier to sit down and talk about wearables and talk about hardware to a customer who has an opportunity to save, you know, 20 to 25% of picking time or reduce error rates and the like.
I think to build on that too, when the form factor of these early inventions improve, I think the ROI or the applications for the consumer is going to become evoked, or there'll be more of them. If you look at kind of the earlier slides that have been presented in other halls, they showed the very early cell phones, and we all know what they looked like. They were huge. Not all of us would have those in our pockets. Now we have them all in our pockets, so we can take cameras and basically shoot the world with imagery, and then companies such as Instagram come out, and whole new business models get evoked. I think that with AR and where we are, we're in a very, very early phase of what these form factors are like. I think I would completely agree that enterprise is very forgiving of those form factors because the ROI is so strong, but I think it's piggybacked on the pain is high. The consumer doesn't have the same pains that enterprise does. So I think they're going to be pretty stringent on the form factors of wearing those daily. And what's on the floor today is not a wearable that we're all going to be wondering and being excited to run through the grocery store in.
All right, we have a question over here.
This question is for Rich. You had a slide up there talking about how we went from generalized hardware, and then you said we're moving into the more, I guess, specific, customized, use-based hardware. is that vision, do you think that vision is going to come full circle where we go back to more generalized hardware moving into the future? So the second picture you had was more of a midterm goal, and then in the long term, coming back around to that generalized again?
You know, I think, like any technology, as it advances and as you have the ability to get rid of the trade-offs you have to make today. So, you know, the broader set of capabilities the hardware has today, the wider range of trade-offs you have to make, whether it's power or heat or durability or anything else. I think as processing improves and technology advances, you don't have to make those trade-offs. So I do think the technology platform, the hardware platform itself, you'll have the ability to have a broader range of capabilities that would perhaps allow you to address multiple use cases because you don't have to make those sacrifices that you have to make today. So yes, I do think there will be somewhat coming back full circle. I don't ever see a one-size-fits-all hardware solution. You know, as one of the other speakers mentioned, right, there's a huge range of hardware today, and I guess the question is why. And I think, you know, why is someone willing to spend $4,000 on one pair of glasses, and someone else thinks $500 is obnoxious? And it's really driven by what capabilities are they looking for. So.
Okay, we have a couple questions on the back here.
Thanks. I think this is mostly for the first speaker, but anybody feel free. I really liked how you emphasized that the AR was a tool to the user, and that I think really helps get us in a user-centric point of view. My question is, did you get any resistance from your users in terms of feeling like this was imposing a certain way, like a standardized way you're supposed to do it, and that's just not the way how I like to do this task? Or this feels like Big Brother's looking over my shoulder, tracking everything I do, wanting to make sure I follow this really rigid set of instructions. We've found that when we give some of our field workers a job aid, like even a tablet app, they get just like, I know, I don't want to do it this way. And I was wondering if you've had that experience, and if so, how you overcome it.
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting point. I think what you're touching on is actually something much deeper, which is that often these teams that work in the field are often disconnected from the leadership that often imposes the tools upon them. And so many of these teams in the field who are being asked to use the technology have in fact had no say in how the technology gets developed or what the end solution is. So I think to take to your point of, you know, what can you do in order to get better buy-in or to perhaps get better response from the teams, get them engaged, you know, make them a part of the design process, and don't make it a management or a back office or a corporate development activity. Make them part of the solution rather than assuming that you're going to build it and they're just going to use it. I think those things are very important, and certainly some of the things that I think you mentioned are things that we saw firsthand in our experience working with those teams in the field.
I would just add on that from one experience. I think the closer the hardware and software support the current way they do business, they perceive it more as assisting them in doing their work. The more you have to deviate from their current standard operating procedures, then it starts to feel like it's more intrusive. So I think it's, you know, really incumbent on the folks that are developing the use cases to really spend a lot of time up front working with those folks to figure out, you know, how are they doing it today, and what do I put in place? And it's not just from a perception standpoint, right? It's just from an adoption standpoint and the ability to actually gain the efficiencies that you're looking for. If later on, you know, they determine that there's some procedural changes or process changes, it's a lot easier to start with what I'm doing now and helping you do it better. And then worry about kind of tweaking those processes later on, but not forcing the process into the hardware itself or the software.
So there was a comment about how hardware and software manufacturers and providers really need to work together to make enterprise AR a reality or a successful reality. To what extent do you think that kind of collaboration is occurring right now? And I mean, does there need to be an increased level of collaboration for this to go on?
I'll take that on a little bit, and maybe I can be piggybacked by my peers up here. I think at the end of the day, Each company's going to kind of find their own path, but much like we're talking about how do you get AR to be really well consumed by a user, the earlier discussion was you go out to the users and say, what pains are you feeling and how can I help you make those pains go away, or how can I make you more efficient? Not, here's this solution we've thought for you to use, please use it. That feels a little more commanding. If you went out and said, hey, I want to invest in you to become more efficient, what can I do to make your life better and make you happier and more productive? I'm the CEO of this company and I value you as a field service engineer. How can I help? And we want to give you money and technology to make you do a better job. That all of a sudden makes you lean forward going, wow, show me what you've got and let's collaborate and play together. I think to your question of how do we as an industry work together, we have to do the same thing, which is, Atheer sits right across from APX today. You could view them as a competitor, you could view them as a peer. We're viewing them as a peer. We walked over and said, what are you guys working on today? Show me what you're finding with your customers. Where are you finding challenge? Where can we help you? What are you learning today on the floor that you're picking up? Here's what we're finding out. And not view each other as a threat, but view each other as, I need all these people on this row to be successful if AR is going to take off faster. We can sit there and kind of poke each other and go, that guy's is not so good as mine, but that doesn't help the industry at all. So I think you have to lean into this saying, we're here to change the way humans interact with information, and let's do it together. Some of us are going to have some leadership that's going to help their hardware game this month. That hardware game is going to change next week with a new invention, as will the software. So I think you have to be somewhat amenable to the fact that, yes, we compete, but we're really collaborating. And if you open up with collaboration as kind of your first piece, I think you'll find a way to make some really big impacts in the market. And eventually, I think your money will flow. So I would just say it's a spirit or it's an outlook more than it's anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that from a hardware standpoint, I feel like I'm kind of the hardware spokesman up here, but from a hardware standpoint, we view the software providers as our eventual customer or as our channel to the end customer. So while we're all busy and we tend to get myopic, when we were developing our most recent platform, we solicited the input of folks like Atheer, we solicited the input of folks like Apex, we've talked to Pete. We try to gather their insight of what they're seeing on the software side. And in all honesty, if it was just a blank slate and we said, what's the perfect piece of hardware for those applications, what would that look like? So I think there is a fair amount of collaboration going on between hardware and software providers, at least from our standpoint. I think initially there was very little because I think a lot of the hardware was delivered as, I don't want to narrow it down to purely a consumer focus, but certainly there was a big consumer focus originally. So there wasn't a lot of anticipation for how should I tailor my hardware or how can I optimize it to support a lot of the learnings that are coming out of the pilots that are supported by a lot of the software folks. But I do think there's probably more collaboration than it may appear going on in this space.
Yeah, I'd add on that it's really an ecosystem play. There's not one company that can corner the market and could solve this. And we look at it, so we work with the solution providers that build the end user applications. Each one of those solutions, so it's a route to market, right? So then each one of those solution providers, they'll have multiple pilots because they've got that end customer engagement. They manage that relationship. And then each one of those pilots have multiple devices, and we charge per device. So it's in our best interest to partner with as many solution providers as possible in order to be effective in the market.
I think to put a capstone on it, at least at Atheer, we tend to build hardware. We also offer software. But at the end of the day, we have the kind of adage that the smartest person's all of us. So we want to get exposed to as many customer applications as we can. That's only going to be if we kind of partner with the other glasses makers. So we work with ODG, we work with Vuzix, we work with Recon, and they use our software in their platforms, and we help their customers enable really great use cases quickly with some of the software that we've stumbled upon with our own engagements. But that allows us to learn from them, learn from their customers, and our software and the industry moves faster if we do that. So I think at the end of the day, it's really just looking at each other saying, let's go get smart.
All right, thank you guys. We are out of time, so please join me in thanking our speakers and our panelists for today.